Thank you, Elena, and thank you, everyone. It's always a delight to be here. I am really, I look forward to this event. It's like the third time that I participate, and I absolutely love it. But before I get going with what I wanted to tell you, I heard so many interesting things so far that I'm going to be starting immediately reacting to what I heard. First one, I would like to reassure, this is not a competition, but I would like to reassure Commander Parker that we have history in the United States too. We don't need to have an inferiority complex with Vicenza. The American Society for Microbiology that I have the honor to lead is 125 years old. So that is, that sometimes feels like a burden more than an asset, but it is good. The second thing I want to mention, which is actually very related to what I'm going to be talking today, is a very brief conversation that I had with your young and dynamic mayor. And I was just talking at the meeting that Elena Zambon just mentioned in Venice to a former colleague of yours, the former mayor of Florence. And I asked him the same exact question that I asked you 3 minutes ago. And I said, like, so when you were mayor of Florence, you know, what was your biggest challenge, right? And in my pea brain, the mayor of Florence, right, you think he's going to be talking about how to preserve art, you know, restoration, money to preserve this incredible, you know, artwork, which I would assume would be the same for Vicenza or in a different scale maybe, but that is, and instead his answer was sustainability. Like, how do we maintain a city, which is a small city, functional, you know, with all these people coming here? Your mayor gave me the exact same answer. I was expecting him to talk about, you know, some problems with the city, and instead his answer was climate change, essentially, and ensuring that we can preserve the territory in the right way, and viability trains and all this issue. So this is so germane to what I'm going to be talking today. This is what about One Health is about. And I'll get more specific than that. You gave a great introduction to what it is. But it is the fact that we sometimes think very small. We think that the problem is solving this. In reality, we're living in a world where everything is interconnected and everything is changing at that unprecedented speed. And so whether you are a politician with responsibility of a city, of a country, of the world, if that exists, is always thinking, how do we make this possible to sustain the future that's in front of us? And I'll be talking a lot about it. But the third thing that I want to react to before I get going is hearing from different speakers the relevance and the impact that Camp Ederle has in the city. First of all, thank you for your service. It is really important. I have great esteem both from what you do in the military with your service, and that for which we thank you, and also at a second level of order for your leadership. I think in the military you provide an incredible school of leadership. And I'll tell you a small anecdote which is so impressed in my brain. Many years ago, or a few years ago, I was working in government, and on a project, I was working actually on an Army project, the Army Stars project, which was aimed towards understanding what were the causes of suicide in the Army being so much higher than in the general population. We have a fascinating conversation to have, but that's a different topic. And with that, we were working with the Joint Chief of Staff of the Army that started with General Corelli, which I'm sure you know, and then the episode that I want to tell you was actually with General Austin, who now happens to be the Secretary of Defense. At that time, he was Vice Chief of Staff. And we were with a group working, and we're all day in his office. Now, if you've ever been in the That's the worst building in the world. It has to be. Has no windows, essentially. And the generals all have the worst offices in terms that they have no windows. And you feel like in a bunker. And we were there all day long, meeting with the general and with his staff. And so I went in there at 9 a.m. and I left at 5 p.m. And when I got in the morning, there was an assistant. At that time, there was still a lot of photocopying being done. And so this is the office where you can't take your phone. You have to lock them out. It's a skiff, it's called. And so you get in, and so every time you had to make a call or check something, you had to walk out. And every time I was walking out, I was seeing this assistant that was photocopying, right? So 9 o'clock, she was photocopying. Then I go out, she was photocopying. I go to the bathroom, she was photocopying. I leave at 5 p.m., and she was still photocopying, right? And I was feeling so horrible for this lady. And I said, like, I am really sorry. I don't want to be, asking questions that I shouldn't, but can you tell me, what is your job description? And I was thinking to myself, you must be incredibly frustrated, right? You've been photocopying the whole day. Her answer, without skipping a beat, she said, I keep F-16 in the air. That is leadership. That is leadership. So kudos to the leadership training that you have in the military, because understanding that we all have a job, all have a function for a bigger mission, that's one of the hardest things possibly to do. So really, thank you for that. Okay. So I need to turn this on. There we go. Yep. Perfect. So what I'd like to talk about today, as it is really One Health, but I try to put in a context even broader than that. And if you'll remember only one thing from what I'll try to deliver today, is that our world, our environment, nature, health, and science, and people, it's all connected. And that is why it's so messy. And that's why it's so complicated. And if we try to take approaches in the long run for addressing only one issue, we are essentially, as we say in Italian, we're putting panni caldi sulle ferite. We're not doing anything, right? We're just using warm cloth or compresses, to try to heal a wound. Let me start from here. What I do is I study microbes, and that's what the mission of our organization is. And it's a perfect example to describe what I want to say today. So this is a study here, which was published a little while ago in 2021 in Nature Biotechnology, which is not an ASM journal, but it's still decent. Hope you understand my sarcasm here. It's a competitor. This was a catalog that was done of different microbes around the world, and it's by no means complete. But it has something that I really want to point your attention to. So here you see around the world where in this study the microbes were sampled. And here, this is the most important part, you're going to see where these microbes are coming from. Especially with the pandemic, we always think microbes as pathogens, right? Microbes as bad, microbes as related to human health. And of course, that is true. You see the vast majority here of this sampling is in human, and not all of them are going to be pathogen. And let me come to another, perhaps, truth that is not always known. Less than 1% of all the microbes in the world are pathogenic. So the very vast majority are either beneficial or not having an impact on health. So they're certainly human, but look, there's marine, there's freshwater, soil, built environment. This room is filled with microbes, and so on and so forth. In our body, we have more microbes than human cells. And so when we talk to politicians, we always say, don't take a vote because we humans lose, right? So microbes dominate, our human health. But it is really extremely diverse, and the quantity of microbes is truly amazing, and it's everywhere. So if you think about this, and I'm starting from the presence of microbes in the environment so broadly, I'm going to refer to this study, and you'll see the bottom line in the title. This is a McKinsey Global Institute study which estimated that 60% of the input into the global economy could be substituted by biological products. What does this mean? This is the concept of circular economy. This is the concept of sustainability. This is the concept of what we were just talking about. It is all interconnected. It's not just about the paving the roads or preserving the monuments. It is about sustaining life and sustaining the environment. And so if you think about the circular economy, it's this aspect where biological are actually influencing everything that we have. So what does that mean? So it means that the foods that we currently have, can be produced in a much more sustainable way by fermentation and by biological products, which are not possible in full scale right now. I know it is a very sensitive issue. I know in particularly, some government officials really like this idea, but to me, it feels like a lot like when Faraday, the physicist, was asked by a government official, what the heck is with this electricity that you have discovered, right? What do I do with it? And his answer was, I don't know. What I know is that one day you'll be taxing it, right? And so while this seems like, weird and science fiction, will it happen? I don't know, but one day it will be taxed. And so this is really important. So this is true for plants. It's already true in nature now, but it's the scale at which it can happen in terms of sustainability, and we'll come to how to sustain the world's population in a second. And also very important, I'm going to spend a couple of words on this because it's really key. You can use what circular economy means ultimately is the fact that all the leftovers, the waste, the byproducts of our processes can be transformed, mostly by microbes, who are the best chemists in the world, into inputs, into raw material. So what we would throw away and discard, that as waste, they become now new inputs into the economy. And that is what the study of McKinsey about the 60% of the inputs refers to largely. So for example, through type of fermentation called anaerobic, so without oxygen, you can actually produce gas, natural gas, called biogas. And right now it's very inefficient, but again, it will happen. It will be taxed. And you can produce heat and electricity through it. Very important is all bioproducts that you can get at many different levels. Pharmaceutical, that's really key. But also fuel. Through very difficult fermentations, the corn stalks that are left over after the harvest are highly in a material called lignocellulose, which is very difficult fermentation. It's a very complex material. And now it's going through processes where you can actually ferment those and create high-value hydrocarbon that then can be used, for example, for jet fuel for airplanes or others. Now, the issue is these processes here take time and are very expensive. So they're not something, if you ever connect through or go to Frankfurt, you can see there's a big tank that says, green fuel or so. I always suspect that that's empty, but if I ever meet anyone at the airport, I will ask, meaning that it is very economically not convenient now to fly a jet with that type of fuel, but it will. I mean, we had the same problem with the internet, with everything, right? A new technology at the beginning, it's super expensive. Cell phones, and then it becomes eventually there. This is the process of the circular economy. So the message here is microbes in the One Health context that we'll be harping on in many different places for the next 20 minutes or so. It's not just about health, but it is about sustainability. And One Health is about making the whole environment whole and having it all together and connected. It is about economics. It is about how do you meld together. And I really want to commend the Fondazione Zoe for really marrying these two things. We were just talking a second ago, with the University of Milano having a fellowship that deals with the economics and the biology of that. And even them say, oh, that's interesting, I haven't thought about it. Let's learn something. This is exactly what we need to do. And like anything in science, we don't know. If you were to know, it wouldn't be science, it wouldn't be research, it would be just search. Instead, it is really a process. And that's when you're at the verge of discovery, you don't know. And but you have to keep going at it. So really important. So I told you all the good stuff that can come from this. Now let me tell you about the pathogenic aspects, because they're really important. And the pandemic had made it super clear to everyone, but we already knew that. So this is really the concept, in my view, of One Health, which is really a circular, as you were very appropriately saying, but I depicted it in linearly simply because it was easier for the graphics. But it is super important to realize that the pathogens are in the environment. They already exist in the natural environment. And that is super important. So the SARS-CoV-2 virus that generated the pandemic of COVID-19 was very happily in the jungle, in the bats, most likely in the environment, and it's the spillover into the human part that created a problem. But the virus had been there for billions of years already. And so if you look here, understanding then the pathogens that are in the environment through surveillance, detection, it's super important. And this is the very early part. And very important is to study and to avoid the contact and the spillover into the human population. Then when that happens, you're going to have an outbreak. And early detection is super important. That's why the diagnostics, last year at this event, we talked a lot about the diagnostics, and that's where it fits. And ultimately, you need to control the spread at a global level. So the point here is that if we focus on the health and the pandemic, it's way, way too late. Everything started over here in the environment. That's why One Health is so important. If we have a problem and we try to solve it when we are here, we're already doomed to find a solution. But, and I think the mayor had to go to a different event, but I wish he were here, so relay it to him. Be demanding with your politicians at the local and national level, because, and this is the same all over the world, you have to be reelected in a certain time frame. For the US it's 2 years, imagine that. If you're a member of the House, every 2 years you get reelected, it's mind-boggling. So everything, your scheme is like 2 years, right? I need to make an impact in 2 years. This thing's it's like 200 years, 20 years, the scale is different. But it is very important, because if we only act when we have an emergency, we are essentially, dealing with a problem that it's unsolvable in many respects. But we need to really focus on these early stages, which when nothing is going to be in the news, no one's going to care. And if we don't have a sustainability, trust me, science is not something where you flip a switch and the light comes on. You need to have, the electricity keeps coming back as a theme here, you need to have electricity and produce and in the power in the system. All right, so I always like to link this to antimicrobial resistance because I think it's a great example and I think it's largely unnoticed to the general public. If you think the pandemic was bad, think again, because antimicrobial resistance is way worse. And Right now, we have microbes called like superbugs that are actually resistant to almost all antibiotics that we know of. And colistin, as you see here, is a terrible drug because it has a lot of side effects. People who take it are really, really sick. As a general toxicity, very high. But it's often the antibiotic of last resort because can't find anything that works. And so the news has been filled with all these events all the time. And I don't have time to describe it all in detail why that is, but I'll touch upon it. First of all, to give you a sense of the problem, right now, today, antimicrobial resistance, has a relevance, and you see the ischemia, stroke, dementias, and antimicrobial resistance, the importance to death related to AMR. But if nothing changes in 2050, which is just around the corner, there will be 10 million deaths a year due to infections that cannot be treated, and it will be bigger than cancer as a problem. Because the issue is so pervasive, just to give you an example, if you talk to an orthopedic surgeon who does hip replacement, which now is pretty much a standard surgery, typically the answer you get, the biggest concern they have are infections. Because the material that they use can get coated by biofilms, which become resistant to antibiotics. So even a simple wound or a simple treatment that you need a hospital visit could become lethal in a world where you don't have antibiotics that work. So that is really important. So it is again, to the theme of One Health. We always see antimicrobial resistance as a hospital problem, and indeed, hospital-acquired infection is a huge issue. They tend to be the worst in terms of resistance for obvious reasons, but the problem is ultimately an environmental one. It is in the environment where you have all these resistance genes. And this study here, which I am showing, is a study that looked at the favelas of Peru and surveyed randomly the microbes there, and they found over 1,000 genes that give resistance to antibiotics, which have never been heard before, and for which there's absolutely no drugs. They would be resistant to every single antibiotic that we have, over 1,000, just by a random sampling. So these are not going to stay in the slums of Peru. They're going to be soon in the emergency room in Vicenza and at Italy and wherever, and all around the world because of that interconnectivity. So this is the problem that we're dealing with. This is the environmental problem. This is the One Health issue. It is all connected. So without getting too technical, but let me tell you, why is it a problem? So why can't we solve it, right? We solved everything, so why can't we solve this? Well, first of all, it is, let's look at the scientific challenge, and I touch on the economic very briefly. First of all, it is a toxicity problem. It's a big issue because normally drugs work at a concentration of nanomolar, while antibiotics works at micromolar level. So you need 1,000 more of the molecule in order to have an effect. And so by using so much, most of the molecule are actually toxic. And so you have to discard a lot of your candidates simply because they may be great, but the body doesn't sustain them. It's toxic, and so they get eliminated right at the start. Second, microorganisms are incredible, and they're very resistant with their membranes to getting stuff into inside the microorganism, and so they're very impermeable, and so very hard to get your drug targeted to the microorganism. And even if you can get in, again, super smart, they have pumps that pump it out, right? And so it's called efflux pumps. And so again, the old way of circumventing the drug. And this is why, because it's evolution, because we as humans have been shaped by the co-evolution with microbes. And because there are so many and they're so abundant, their evolution is on warp speed compared to ours. And so they adapt so easily and so quickly that they outsmart us all the time. So relax, because we're never going to win this war. So the question is, how do we keep up with it? And how do we invest it? Because microbes will always be with us. There's absolutely no way that can avoid it. And antimicrobial resistance will always be with us. This was clear from the very beginning when Alexander Fleming discovered penicillin, the first antibiotic. It was a fantastic discovery, and which saved so much lives, uncountable. But Fleming, in his first paper that he published, he immediately noted that did not escape my attention that this eventually will become ineffective, after the microbe, because he observed on the plate that there, after a while, the bacteria would actually be resistant to penicillin. So it was clear from the very beginning, and that was very true because that's what it is. I like to show this picture because to explain the economic challenge. So we remember this phone, and this was still around, at least in my house, and I suspect in many of yours, in the 1980s. And that is when the most innovative antibiotics that we use today were discovered. So we are essentially treating treating bacteria today with antibiotics that were developed by scientists talking on this phone, right? And why is that? Well, the reason is that it's a classic example of market failure. To develop an antibiotic, the net present value, which is the technical way economists measure their return on investment. I don't need to explain this to Zambon Pharmaceutical, how you calculate the return on investment in a particular drug, is about 10 times less than, let's say, a cancer, which is typically the most remunerative at this moment. And so there is little incentive for companies to develop that. And second, even if you do it, the rule number one is don't use it, right? If you develop a new antibiotic, stewardship requires that you do not use it unless you really need it. So it's the exact opposite of what you would want when you discover a new drug. You hope it's going to be used by a lot of people. And so that is why it's so difficult. And that's why there's a lot of activity. In the United States, there is now legislation which has been floating around in Congress for now 2 sessions of Congress called the Pasteur Act, which wants to put government incentives, called pull incentives, by having partnership between the government and the pharmaceutical industry in these are not grants, which would be push incentives, these are pull incentives, where you actually set milestone and say, okay, I, the government, will give you this much amount of money to develop a new antibiotic, but, just like you do in the pharmaceutical industry, by this time, you will have to reach this milestone. Once you get that, there is to be another installment of money coming from the government. And that is very appropriate to do so, because this is a public good, which is when economists really say that government intervention is needed, because you need to de-risk the market, because for the reason I just said, it's not possible. Okay, let's move on. So as if this was not relevant enough, so first I talked to you about the sustainability of the economy, the input, the circular economy, how to make everything sustainable, and how microbes are the perfect agents to do that. That's the positive. There's the challenge of the pathogens and how to deal with that. And as you can see, it's getting worse if we don't do anything. But there's more. There's more bad news. And I don't want to be a Cassandra. I'm not. I'm truly an optimist. But this is the point: is really that we need to invest in education and innovation. That's the message, and I'll come to that. Let's look at the world. Here you see the world population by continents and I picked 1989 as the start because I find that extremely important date. That's when essentially the world changed with the fall of the Berlin Wall. In 1989, there were about 5 billion people on Earth. The United Nations estimates that next year, we would be crossing the $8 billion. It's unprecedented in the history of humanity, this rapid growth. If I were to chart this, you would see a logarithmic curve on this. If we look at 2075, the projection is that there are going to be 10 billion people on Earth. So think about what I just told you, the two messages I sent you, the circular economy and the sustainability, and the pathogenic nature of antimicrobial resistance and other. So now we'll have to deal with 10 billion people doing this. As if this was not enough, pay attention to the distribution of this population. And this is even more worrisome. Africa, by 2075, is going to double its population from what it's now. Doubling the population of Africa. I'll tell you in a second that we do a lot of work in Africa. I travel to Africa a lot. Is there anyone here from the U.S. Africa Command? There we go. And when you think about the infrastructure, the health there, and you think of adding double that population, dear God, right? How are we going to be sustaining? How are we going to be preventing epidemic and all those problems? Now, this is another data point, which I think is very important. This is a study from Goldman Sachs in a document, very extensive, fascinating, called Path to 2075. If you have any interest, it's very complex and very interesting. Here is just one snippet of it. Is look in 2075, in that year, the ranking of the largest economies. Well, no surprises. China's going to be the first one. We would have guessed that. India is going to be the second one. Here also, perhaps not surprising. The United States, maybe, no surprises here either. But look at that. After that, Indonesia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Egypt, Brazil. First European country, number 9, Germany. We're talking about the largest economies in the world in 2075, which is pretty much around the corner. So my point here is that not only we have a sustainability problem, which I just showed you in the slide before. And by the way, everything in economics is essentially driven by demographics. So this really reflects that slide before. But not only we have a sheer number of people that we need to support, but also the countries that are going to be leading the world are going to be very different than the countries that since World War II have been leading the world. Think about what are our values of democracy, of innovation. We're just coming from this artificial intelligence seminar. So all the issue of ethics related to artificial intelligence, are they going to be governed by countries that have very different history? So I'm not being judgmental here, even if you may think so. I'm just saying this is going to be incredibly different, incredibly more complex. Are we equipped to harness the future of the world with those problems from a health and One Health perspective, when we're going to have a mix of characters that are working with completely different criteria and values that we have thus far? So again, this is a strong message for our society, for our politicians, for the world politician and the local politicians about how do we think about this issue. And I'll come to that in a second. So with this complex world, and let me say, and this may seem pandering, but I love the fact that you call it Zambon open education, because this was so visionary, because ultimately it is about open. One Health is open data. Without data, it's open access, being able to access things, open science, open education. It's all interconnected. Without that, it's not possible. And we should shout it loud, this open. The emphasis should be on open, because with this world here, open is not guaranteed. And we certainly need a hell of a lot of education. And so that's why what we're doing here, that's why the volunteers of the foundation, which I absolutely adore, I always like interacting with them. It's so important to engage everyone in this. This is open, this is everyone. This is not an elite thing. If you think that you can govern these changes in the economy, in the population, in the science, by 10 smart people in a room who had studied a lot, think again. They're not going to go anywhere with that, right? So this is not about scientists being smart, politicians, whatever. This is about people. This is about getting all together. And, I am concerned by that. And so we need to build a world where open is really the key word of what we do. So in this, we're dealing with urbanization. I'm switching to Africa very quick. I'm going to go quick now because all the key concepts I think are already seeded, hopefully. But with this concept of doubling the population in Africa, for example, or urbanization around the world, these problems are going to be exacerbated, that I mentioned. The climate that we just briefly mentioned is not even to be mentioned what it does, both to health, to the environment, and everything. I'm returning from Beijing. I was there, I came back Monday, and a week ago, and it's incredible, right? So they have this approach, like, if we move this mountain here, right, if we change this river, to go there, and they do it. They do it, right? That's the thing about it. They walk their talk. But then with the climate change, the amount of natural disasters in China are incredible, right? So it's all connected. Yes, technology, we can move mountains, literally, right? But then what happens, right? Think about warming and all that. And then this human-animal interaction, because I told you all these microbes, the pathogens, are often stored in animals as reservoirs. And now with this interaction and urbanization, this is going to be exacerbated, and you're going to have double the amount of people in those. So you get the point. So our organization, the American Society for Microbiology, we work a lot in Africa. As I mentioned, I'm going to be very quick. This doesn't want to be an advertising for us, really. Don't take it that way, please. But just to give you a sense of why we're all interconnected, why it is a One Health issue. And these are the countries in Africa where we work. It's irrelevant. We have over 1,000 consultants that we use in Africa in different roles, mostly, almost all of them scientists or healthcare operator that work in training and working with mostly the lab diagnostics, but also in the clinics and various aspects in dealing with pathogens, detection and treatment and all that. And in particular, we worked very close with the government of Tanzania to develop a One Health approach for antimicrobial resistance. Because, as I was telling you, it is wonderful if in Vicenza we do these wonderful things, right? But if you look at the demographics, what matters, it's often Africa. And that's why it is so important, or Asia or so. And so very important this. And this is a long game, and we have to measure. You can't manage what you can't measure. So this seems daunting, and you say, how are we going to ever do that? So you need to set yourself very short milestones, and then keep chipping away and growing and accelerating as much as possible. We are proud, for example, saying that through that action, we've been able to collect more data. Without data, you can't even know what to treat. So in Tanzania now, we have much more data than we used to have about the presence of pathogen and the resistance of pathogens. So again, this is saying that. So the way forward to sustainability for us in this respect is really being committed to that, working with the government. That's why I insist, and you probably heard me, those who I already met in other occasions, how important it is to engage society, the politicians, the general public. This is fundamental, because if we don't do that, again, it's it's actually counterproductive to have these great plans that a few people in a dark room filled with smoke, will actually deploy and say, here, we brought you the solution to your problem. Not sure how that's going to fly. And, to punt a joke on our U.S. friends, it's like in the Western movies, right? When you say, duck under, the feds are here, we're here to help, right? That doesn't really work, right? It is participatory. So that is really the key message. So these are examples of a policy framework, all based on One Health, that we worked with different organizations and different governments, trying to really get these concepts through our leaders in various countries, WHO, and of course, who's totally on board on this, and various local governments around the world. This is why it's so important what we do, because we're not, you're a foundation just like us, right? We're a nonprofit, so we speak for the science, and we want to be able to drive the policies in the direction that will make the world a better place and more sustainable. So, in conclusion, if you have to remember a couple of things, trying to summarize this, is that One Health is crucial. It is incredibly difficult. It is daunting, but it is all interconnected. And we think that we're working with our own little silos. We're going to be rearranging chairs on the deck of the Titanic. And instead, we need really to address the issue. It's tough, but we have to do it. Ooh, looks like I rearranged my slides before. Okay, let me do it this way then. Second, microbes know no border. Microbes are going to be with us. They're going to be causing trouble. They're going to be the solution to our problems. I love, in particular, the microbe that eats plastic. That's fantastic, right? So now it takes to chew up for a microbe, a bottle of water takes about, something like 50 years. So not exactly sustainable, but we'll get it done quickly. You're going to have one day your pet microbe in the trash can at home, that will take care of your plastic. The recycle will be done by microbe because it's a circular economy eventually. Very important. Artificial intelligence, I didn't talk about it, but this is fundamental for what we're doing. And we were discussing with Elena not too long ago, understanding how microbes interact with our bodies and use that as a diagnostic tool to understand what is it. Do I need to take an antibiotic? It's a viral infection, so I just need time and sit quietly? Or it's got nothing to do with an infection and it's something else. And this is the future. And artificial intelligence, which is quite scary in some respects, but it is absolutely an asset for this because this is a massive amount of data. The signal to noise is terrible. This is all noise with very little signal. And so that's exactly what these computational techniques are going to be so phenomenal at. So I'm incredibly optimistic by this, mitigated by the fact that of the values and the world-class leaders who will run these things here, as we talked before, because that's going to be important. And finally, this is a very important concept. And Elena, I was about to ask yesterday at the plenary session, but I didn't want to take away any time from much more important people than I am. And I feel, let me conclude on this. It's optimistic, but I feel, especially coming from the United States, that Europe, and I'm not talking about Italy, I'm talking Europe in general, has this approach to seeing itself without really looking at the assets that it has. And to me, the biggest assets that you have in Europe that we don't have in the United States are two. Number one, in the United States, we have a healthcare system that has three problems. It's not healthy, it's not caring, and it's not a system. Other than that, we work perfectly. And in Europe, you have, every country, I think, has a national healthcare system. think about the asset that you have in terms of the data, of the open data that you can get to understand through artificial intelligence or other things, what is it, that pathogen, that's causing this, and knowing it not in 3 weeks or 2 weeks, but knowing it in 10 minutes. You can do that. This is an incredible asset that it has, but the European needs to get out of the mindset of being the chief regulators in the world, that everything is regulated and nothing can happen because everything is regulated, right? And so we want to protect the people, of course. I'm not saying that we need, fly-by-night companies to do stuff, obviously. But the asset of having data, it's fundamental. And you have a very big edge on, at least on the United States. China, I think, is the exact opposite. But I'll come to the second asset that you have, which I think people don't think. I may be wrong, but I'm very convinced of this today. The future of healthcare is going to be in the hands of those who own diversity, because that is absolutely fundamental. The genomic diversity, the diversity of microbes, is absolutely key to the future. Because in all these diagnostics, think about artificial intelligence or whatever, it's all about training the systems to understand, very different sets of data, all the various possibilities. When you have populations that are very homogeneous, they're going to be missing out, on a lot of the interaction and of the data. For example, I think this is a huge problem that I think China will have. They have a much more homogeneous gene pool than the United States or that Europe has. And so owning that diversity, when these diagnostic systems become routine, and they will, and you can crunch all the data of what is happening, the more diversity you have in your healthcare system, in your environment, the more you'll have a golden asset to find the solution. Because if you're always looking at the same thing, you'll have one solution, right? So the point here is that if we think from a health perspective, pharmaceuticals, the era where you have, so I've been on statins for like 30 plus years, something like that. I have high cholesterol, genetic, diet doesn't do a thing, right? And so that the perfect case where you have one pill that's been developed and like hundreds of millions of people take it, right? And that's it, right? But that's not the future of drugs. The future of drugs are going to be highly specialized for think about oncology is already there now, right? So every cancer is essentially a rare disease because you're going to have a target for that. All healthcare is going to be like that. And it's all going to be about these starting from the environment and moving into the health. And it's all going to be connected. So diversity is a good thing. The more diversity you have, the better poised you are to solve the problems. But diversity is really hard to handle. Very hard to handle. Very expensive. Very hard. And that's why we need science. That's why we need open. Open education, open access, open science, open data. And this is really the message key. And the fact that you have this in your name, I think nothing can go wrong. Thank you so much.
Anyone wants to make some question to Stefano? It's an opportunity. If you want to share your thoughts about what we face with this on these topics. Otherwise, I would like to share with you two strong messages that I received this evening. So thank you for sharing your big picture, actually, really so wide and so important for me to understand how to intervene as an actor, as a pharmaceutical company also, no, in this. Sure. Which brings to me 2 points that that I totally agree. that we are talking, when we talk about One Health, we are talking about sustainability, which means for us, as well as a company, of economic sustainability, how to take things together, and at the same time, how can we participate and contribute to the sustainability of, for too long, we didn't care about as a word, entire word, and as individual as well. No, the new generation normally tells us that we just live our life without thinking about them. No, and now here's the responsibility. We don't have any more time to do not think about them. No, about their future. And the second, so thank you to connect this One Health and sustainability, because it's true, everything is so connected and so tight, the space in which we have to intervene. But the second thought that I appreciate so much is that I think it's the time to have courage, because to be open, you have to accept sometimes to lose the control of everything. We cannot, if you want to be open, you have to accept open access, open data, that you are not in control, So where you can work on, we have just one infrastructure that we have to invest in, and this is trust. Trust among us, among people, among communities. So finding a common ground where we can grow together, otherwise, we cannot survive, I think, because of all of this. So, and this is the reason why foundation, association have to work together, because trust is a big effort with a long-term view that can only be think about it. Otherwise, if you think just a short term, and this is the problem. Politics, they don't have long term. They are interested in the voting, how to get vote, and they don't have time enough to take these big decisions, which are system decisions. So saying that is how can we build, and it's one of the main reason why we wanted to share with you as a different culture as well, bringing together the same goal, to progress, to improve one of the main need of all of us as community, which is health. So, but be encouraged to understand that you cannot control everything, Which, saying this to a military system, I understand is not so,
Sure.
so natural. But investing in people and in how can you trust them, And fortunately, I think there are many organizations around the world that are working against war, and how to build this common ground in order to prevent. We didn't realize, at least in Europe, that for 70 years we didn't have, and even more, we didn't have a war in Europe. And the new generation, they don't have come si chiamano I ricordi, the memories, My generation can have, because my parents told us about it. So how can they feel the risk of the danger of have a war? So, and this is also the let's say the strength of having 125 for your association and for a company like this, to bring and look in our legacy, what we cannot do it again, to prevent what other people before us had to support, to survive. So it's something even bigger. I'm sorry that I went in a completely different
No, but thank you, Elena,
field,
for bringing the word trust. That you said it very much more eloquently than I did. But that is absolutely key. If we don't build trust, we will go anywhere, right? And so that is the key word. And that, I think it's the social capital that we lack these days is really trust.
Yeah. So thank you. And this is just an invitation and an opportunity for all of us in Zoe to have, of course, but to have and to consider this evening the starting point, to listening each other, understand your needs, and having regularly some moment like this, but trying to also to divulgate and to share with many people as we can in your community. And this time we try to propose you this topic, but we would like also to listen to you what you consider that is important, to share and to build on. Sorry for
Well, thank you very much. Jim Grady from Consumer Ederly. Thanks for a fascinating presentation. Just some thoughts. We seem to be entering a period of real rapid innovation in sort of the molecular sciences with sort of synthetic biological advances happening at sort of almost local levels, where in the past it was more at universities. So we're seeing, the opportunity for synthetic biology to fix a lot of those problems of sustainability that you kind of mentioned, with food sources, energy sources, pollution, all those things. The flip side of it is I think there's some risks involved with it too. We've seen issues where you can order CRISPR kits at home, and some folks have actually accidentally or on purpose ordered some dangerous strands of like RNA back to their little local laboratory to kind of work on. How can we sort of take advantage of the positive sides of this sort of new revolution of sort of synthetic biology, but maybe mitigate some of the risks to sort of adverse outcomes, or maybe directed sort of threats to certain populations and crops and things like that.
Yeah, no, thank you for your question. At the seminar, where I used an image to describe essentially what you're saying by quoting the late Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who said, "I'm an optimist who worries a lot." And I think that that's the approach that we need to take. Thank you for mentioning synthetic biology, because it's absolutely essential right now. And if you think about systems biology and synthetic biology, it is the perfect field where it has biology in the name, but it's mostly engineering, and you bring together people with very different expertise. And so this issue of interdisciplinarity for these, you won't solve these problems by being siloed, in your own discipline. So that's so important. But the issue of how do you mitigate the risk, it's fundamental. And that's why, like anything that we do, it's risk management. It's not risk elimination. You can't eliminate risk, but you need to manage risk. And so you need a governance for managing the risk. And you need calculate. For example, our organization is deeply involved in I don't want to get too boring with government terms, and I know the military is really good with acronyms, but the issue of dual-use research of concern, it's present in microbiology since forever, right? So you could develop, you can think of a vaccine or something, that could be, studying a microbe that is extremely dangerous, and by studying it, it's absolutely essential to develop a vaccine to it, right? But if you grow anthrax, let's say, right, you could do a hell of a lot of harm with it. But not studying anthrax is not the solution, to having, understanding the biology and finding the solutions. And I can use a billion different examples on this. So it's just like nuclear power, right? You can have a bomb or you can have electricity, and here we go with electricity again. So it's about risk management. And to me, I don't have an answer, to how to do it, but what is worrisome is that we need, when you have a crisis, it's never a good time to exchange business cards for the first time. This is why we want to build partnership and relationships in moments of peace. When you see the problem and you work together, that's how you build trust, and that's how you can build a framework on how to manage the risk. Because if you're doing it when you have a crisis, it won't work. And so that is the worrisome part, that everybody seems to be so nationalistic, like in Naples, they say "fataka." We're kind of reverting to that. If it's not done here, it's not made here, we don't trust it, right? So how do you build that trust, that instead? So this is, to me, I remember 2 years ago I talked a lot about this here. It's the exact opposite of what I would have hoped. It happened when 1989, when the Berlin Wall fell. I was a student in Milan, and I took the train, and I went to Berlin, and I said, I want to see this, and because just Elena said, my dad fought in World War II. I grew up with this, the world is 2 blocks, the good and the bad, and that's how it works. And seeing that seismic change, oh my God, imagine what we're all going to accomplish together now, right? That we can all work together. We're not divided by ideology anymore. You're the bad guy, I'm not going to talk to you, right? We can work together. Boy, was I wrong. That lasted about 2 weeks, and then the world seems to have gone mad. Look at where we are. We're worse than the Cold War. I think there's this Italian magazine that will follow, Limes, that had a title a few years ago, like, we mistook the end of the war for the end of the peace, referring to the Cold War. That was stability. Now it's, pandemonium. And so how do we build that trust, to go back to your word, to do that risk mitigation? It's not something that 10 people can do, nor one government on one person. But that's the solution. There's no other way of doing it, because there is going to be risk for everything. But the solution is not the biggest risk is not taking risk.
So thank you so much, Stefano.
Thank you.
And